I stared at Jake in disbelief, the papers he'd slammed on the counter feeling like a physical blow. "What is this?" I demanded, my voice shaking despite my efforts to remain calm. Sarah smirked from the doorway. "It's pretty simple, Laura. This house belongs to Kyle and me now. You're being evicted." "Evicted?" I echoed, my mind racing. How could this be happening? This was my home, the home I'd poured my heart and soul into building with Jake after we married 15 years ago. Jake's expression was cold, devoid of the warmth I'd once seen in his eyes. "The deed is in our name now. You have 30 days to get out." Anger flared within me, burning away the initial shock. "You can't do this," I cried, rounding on him. "This house was my dream, my life's work, after everything I sacrificed to make this happen for us." "For us?" Jake cut me off with a harsh laugh. "Don't delude yourself, Laura. This was always about you and your selfish desires." But the words stung like a slap to the face. Selfish? I was the one who'd worked tirelessly to build my kimono dressing business from the ground up, all so we could have a comfortable life together. While Jake spent his days golfing and gambling, I was the one bringing in a steady income, saving every penny to make our dream home a reality. Sarah's snide voice broke through my thoughts. "Listen to your husband, Laura. It's time for you to move on and let the next generation take over." I opened my mouth to protest, but the smug looks on their faces stopped me cold. In that moment, I realized the truth. They'd been plotting this for who knows how long, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. Well, if they thought I was going down without a fight, they had another thing coming. "Fine," I said, forcing a calm I didn't feel. "I'll go. For now." I met Jake's gaze, letting the fire in my eyes convey the message he'd regret this betrayal. As I turned and walked away, Sarah's mocking laughter followed me out. But I didn't care. A plan was already forming in my mind, a plan that would make them pay for every ounce of pain and humiliation they'd caused me. They wanted to play dirty? I'd show them just how dirty I could get. Revenge was a dish best served cold, and by the time I was done, they'd be left out in the cold with nothing. I sat on the couch in Megan and Eric's living room, staring blankly at the muted TV. My body was there, but my mind kept replaying the events of the past 24 hours like a broken record. "Mom?" Megan's voice pulled me from my thoughts. She settled beside me, concern etched on her face. "Are you okay?" I forced a weak smile. "I'm fine, honey, just processing everything." "I can't believe Dad and Sarah did this," she said, shaking her head. "Kicking you out of your own home? That's low, even for them." Anger flashed in her eyes, and I was reminded of just how protective Megan had always been of me, especially after her father walked out when she was just a kid. She'd been my rock through those tough times, and I had a feeling I'd be leaning on her strength again in the days to come. I should have seen it coming, I admitted, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. The signs were there, Jake's constant business trips, the way he and Sarah would whisper behind closed doors. I just didn't want to believe they could be so cruel. Megan reached over and squeezed my hand. "We'll figure this out, Mom, I promise. They're not going to get away with treating you like this." Her determination was reassuring, but a part of me still felt lost, adrift in a sea of betrayal. This wasn't just about losing my home. It was about having the rug pulled out from under me by the people I'd trusted most in this world. "I keep running it over and over in my mind," I confessed. "All the times Jake promised we were building this house for our future, for our family. And now—" I trailed off, blinking back tears. "Now we know it was all a lie," Megan finished, her jaw set in a hard line. "But we're going to make them pay for every single one of those lies, Mom. I swear it." I studied her for a moment, seeing the fire in her eyes that had always been my source of strength. Maybe she was right. Maybe it was time to stop wallowing and start fighting back. "You're right," I said, straightening my shoulders. "We can't let them get away with this. Not after everything I sacrificed to give us a good life." Megan nodded, a determined gleam in her eye. "Exactly. So what's our first move?" I thought for a moment, then smiled, a slow, predatory grin that would have made even Jake shudder. "First, we find out exactly what your dear old dad and that snake Sarah have been up to behind my back, and then—" I leaned in, my voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Then we make them regret the day they ever crossed me." As I laid out the beginnings of my plan, I could feel the shadows of doubt and hurt receding. In their place, a bright, burning flame of vengeance took hold, and I knew Jake and Sarah were going to get burned. "I can't believe what I'm seeing," Megan muttered, staring at the computer screen in disbelief. "Dad has been siphoning money from your business accounts for years." I leaned closer, my heart pounding as I took in the financial records she'd uncovered. Canceled checks, wire transfers, mysterious cash withdrawals. It was all laid out in black and white, a twisted web of deceit that made me feel sick to my stomach. "That lying, cheating snake," I spat, clenching my fists. All those times he claimed the business was struggling, that we needed to tighten our belts, he was robbing me blind the whole time. Megan shook her head slowly. "It gets worse, Mom. Look at these credit card statements." She clicked over to a new window, and my jaw dropped as I scanned the charges. Designer clothes, lavish vacations, even a brand new sports car. He bought all of that with my hard-earned money? I could barely process the depths of Jake's betrayal. How could he do this to me, to our family? "Because he's a selfish, greedy bastard who only cares about himself," Megan snarled, an uncharacteristic venom in her voice. "And it looks like Sarah was in on the whole thing." She gestured to a series of emails, detailing shady financial dealings and coded messages about covering their tracks. My stomach churned as I read through them, the truth sinking in with each damning line. "They've been playing us for fools all along," I realized, my voice hollow. "Everything, the house, the business, our entire life together, it was all built on lies." For a moment, the anger and hurt threatened to consume me. I could feel the familiar sting of tears pricking my eyes as years of memories were tainted by this harsh new reality. But then I caught sight of Megan's expression, jaw set, eyes blazing with righteous fury, and a different kind of fire ignited within me. "You know what?" I said, straightening my shoulders. "I'm done crying over those two snakes. It's time we took the fight to them." Megan's lips curved into a predatory grin. "I was hoping you'd say that. What did you have in mind?" A plan was already taking shape, one that would hit Jake and Sarah where it hurt most, their reputations, their social standing, their entire carefully constructed facade of respectability. "We're going to expose them for the liars and thieves they really are," I declared, feeling a rush of vindictive glee. "Let's see how smug they are when the whole world knows what kind of people they truly are." Megan nodded, her expression fierce. "Consider it done, Mom. Those two are going to wish they never messed with us." As we dove back into the evidence, plotting our next move, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't experienced in years. Jake and Sarah had made a grave mistake in underestimating me, and by the time I was through with them, they'd be the ones left with nothing. "Are you sure this is a good idea, Mom?" Megan asked, eyeing the hidden camera warily. "What if they find out?" I waved a dismissive hand. "They won't suspect a thing. Not with the little act we've cooked up." I shot her a conspiratorial grin. "Just follow my lead. Okay?" She nodded, though the doubt lingered in her eyes. I couldn't blame her. The plan we'd devised to catch Jake and Sarah red-handed was risky, to say the least. But at this point, I was past caring about playing it safe. Those two had taken everything from me. It was time I returned the favor. The doorbell rang, and I took a steadying breath before pasting on a bright, cheery smile. That must be them. Showtime. I flung open the door to find Jake and Sarah standing on the porch, twin expressions of disdain on their faces. "Laura," Jake said, his tone clipped, "I didn't expect to hear from you again so soon." "Well, you know me. I like to keep an open line of communication in this family," I replied breezily. "Speaking of which, I'm so glad you two could come over today. Megan and I have been doing a lot of thinking." Sarah arched a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Is that so? And what brilliant insights did you come up with this time?" The sarcasm in her voice grated on my nerves, but I refused to take the bait. Not yet, at least. "Why don't you come in and have a seat?" I suggested, gesturing toward the living room. "I'll get us all something to drink, and we can discuss it like the loving family we are." Jake snorted derisively, but allowed me to usher them inside. As I busied myself in the kitchen, I could hear their hushed voices filtering in from the other room, no doubt griping about this little get-together already. Perfect. I returned a few minutes later, a tray of glasses in hand. "Here we are," I chirped, setting it down on the coffee table. "I thought we could start with a nice toast." A toast? Jake eyed the drink suspiciously. To what exactly? To new beginnings, I replied, holding up my glass with a serene smile. I've had some time to think about everything that's happened, and I've realized something important. I paused for dramatic effect. I was wrong to react the way I did. This is your house now, and I need to respect that. Shock flickered across their faces. Clearly, this wasn't the reaction they'd expected. Good. Let them squirm a little. You're being serious? Sarah sputtered. After all that talk about revenge and making us pay? I shook my head sadly. I was just lashing out, saying things I didn't really mean. The truth is, you two were right all along. I'd overstayed my welcome, and it's time for me to move on with my life. I raised my glass again, the picture of sincerity. So, to family and to new beginnings. For a beat, they just stared at me, dumbfounded. Then, like a switch being flipped, their expressions morphed into matching sneers of cruel triumph. Well, well, Jake chuckled darkly, lifting his own glass. I have to say, Laura, I didn't think you had it in you to be reasonable, but I'm glad you've finally seen the light. Sarah clinked her drink against his, that sickly sweet smile never wavering. Yes, this is for the best. After all, we did try to warn you, but you just wouldn't listen, would you? My grip tightened on my own glass as they taunted me, every fiber of my being screaming to wipe those smug looks off their faces. But I held firm, forcing myself to nod and smile through gritted teeth. You're absolutely right, I agreed, the words like ash in my mouth. I should have listened to you both from the start. I'm just so grateful you're giving me another chance. The lies dripped from my tongue like poisoned honey, but it was worth it to see them preen and puff up with self-satisfaction. Megan caught my eye from across the room, giving an almost imperceptible nod. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait for them to spring it themselves. The video went viral within hours. I sat on the couch, my phone buzzing incessantly as the shocking footage of Jake and Sarah's cruel taunts spread like wildfire across social media. Megan had worked her tech magic, editing the clips into a damning expose and blasting it out to every corner of the internet. I can't believe how many people have seen this already, she murmured, scrolling through the deluge of comments and shares. The reaction has been insane. I nodded mutely, my gaze fixated on the screen as the video played again. There they were, my beloved husband and his conniving accomplice, sneering and gloating over their betrayal without the slightest shred of remorse. The hurt was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but it was eclipsed by a burning sense of vindication as the world bore witness to their true ugly natures. My phone chimed again, and I glanced down to see a text from an old friend. Did you see what Laura posted? I'm horrified. Another buzz. Your son and that witch of a wife have some nerve kicking you out like that after everything you sacrificed. The messages kept pouring in, a tidal wave of support and outrage on my behalf. With every notification, I could feel the tide turning in my favor. Well, well, I murmured, unable to keep the smug satisfaction from my voice. Looks like the masses have spoken. Megan grinned, riding the high of our well-executed plan. I told you this would work, Mom. Now the whole world knows exactly who the real victims are here. As if on cue, my phone started ringing, the caller ID flashing Jake's number. I smirked and hit ignore, letting it go to voicemail as a fresh wave of texts flooded in. How dare they treat you like that? You're handling this with such grace, Laura. Stay strong. If my husband ever pulled something like this, I'd leave him in a heartbeat. With each message, I could practically feel their reputations crumbling beneath the weight of public scorn. The tangible outrage, the unwavering condemnation, it was the ultimate revenge, far more potent than any physical act of retaliation. You know, I mused aloud, I used to worry about what people thought of me and my little kimono business, but this? I gestured to the screen, watching the comments multiply by the second. This is a whole new level of notoriety. Megan laughed, high-fiving me with a mischievous gleam in her eye. Just you wait, Mom. By the time we're through, your name is going to be a household phrase for don't mess with this lady. My phone started ringing again. Sarah's number this time. I rolled my eyes and declined the call, picturing her pacing furiously as the world turned against her. Let her stew in her own misery for a while. As the outpouring of support continued, one thing became crystal clear. Jake and Sarah had made a fatal miscalculation in underestimating me. They'd thought they could cast me aside like yesterday's trash, leaving me powerless and alone. But I wasn't alone. Not anymore. Now I had an entire army rallying behind me, thirsting for justice on my behalf, and they were just getting started. A wicked grin curved my lips as I leaned back, basking in the sweet taste of vindication. "You wanted a war?" I murmured. "Well, you've got one now, and this time I'm not taking any prisoners." The fallout was swift and brutal. Within days of the video going viral, Sarah was called into her boss's office and unceremoniously fired from her cushy marketing job. Apparently, having an employee publicly exposed as a lying, manipulative schemer wasn't great for the company image. "I can't believe this is happening," she'd sobbed into the phone when she called to vent her outrage. "After everything I've done for that company, they're just tossing me aside like garbage." I had to bite back a scathing retort about the irony of her words. Instead, I forced myself to make sympathetic noises, all while savoring the delicious taste of her misery. As for Jake, the dominoes were falling just as rapidly. His golf club terminated his membership, his gambling buddies stopped taking his calls, and the investors in his fledgling business venture began jumping ship en masse. "You've ruined me," he'd roared when he finally deigned to show up on Megan's doorstep, red-faced and eyes wild with impotent rage. "Everything I've worked for gone because of your little temper tantrum." I simply arched an eyebrow, unimpressed by his bluster. "I'm sorry. Are you referring to the house and lifestyle you stole from me through years of deception and theft? Because if so, I'd say you got what you deserved." His face purpled with fury, and for a moment I thought he might actually strike me. But Megan stepped between us, her expression thunderous. "Don't even think about it, Dad," she spat, every inch the protective lioness. "You're the one who made your bed, now you can lie in it." With an incoherent snarl, Jake turned and stormed away, leaving us both staring after him. Me with grim satisfaction, Megan with a look of utter disgust. "I can't believe I'm actually related to that jackass," she muttered, shaking her head slowly. I reached out and squeezed her hand, a silent gesture of gratitude for her unwavering support. Without her in my corner, I doubt I would have found the strength to take Jake and Sarah down. As the days ticked by, reports of their ongoing downward spiral continued to trickle in. Sarah had been forced to move back in with her parents, her once enviable designer wardrobe and luxury car repossessed to cover her debts. Meanwhile, Jake was drowning in a sea of legal troubles, fending off everyone from jilted investors to the IRS. With each new humiliation they suffered, I felt a deep, primal sense of satisfaction unfurling within me. This was justice, cold and exquisitely merciless, and they had no one to blame but themselves. One afternoon, my phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. I opened it warily, half expecting another frantic plea for mercy from Jake or Sarah, but the message that awaited me was from an entirely different source. "Mom, it's Kyle. I saw the video and I don't even know what to say. I had no idea Dad and Sarah were capable of something so vile. I'm so sorry." I stared at the words, an uncharacteristic lump forming in my throat. My eldest son, the one who had turned his back on me so callously in the beginning, was finally seeing the truth. As I tapped out a reply, tears pricked at the corners of my eyes, but this time they weren't born of sadness or anger. This time they were tears of relief, of redemption, of a mother's love prevailing against all odds. Maybe, just maybe, there was still hope for healing the deepest of family wounds. But as for Jake and Sarah, they'd gotten exactly what they deserved, and I wasn't shedding a single tear for their well-earned misery. The knock at the door was tentative, almost apologetic. I glanced at Megan, who shrugged before crossing the living room to answer it. The sight that greeted me on the other side very nearly took my breath away. There stood Jake and Sarah, looking utterly defeated, a stark contrast to the smug, self-assured personas they'd projected for so long. "Laura," Jake began, his voice little more than a raspy croak. He opened his mouth as if to continue, then seemed to think better of it, gaze dropping to the floor in dejected silence. I studied them for a long moment, taking in the haunted look in Jake's eyes, the way Sarah's once immaculate appearance had deteriorated into unkempt disarray. Part of me felt a perverse thrill at seeing them brought so low. But an even bigger part simply felt tired, bone-deep weary of the never-ending drama and mind games. "What do you want?" I asked at last, keeping my tone carefully neutral. Sarah flinched as if I'd struck her. "We?" She swallowed hard. "We just wanted to see if the stories were true. That you're taking the house back." My lips pressed into a grim line. "Those stories don't even begin to scratch the surface. But yes, it's true. The house is being returned to its rightful owner, thanks to the efforts of some very dedicated people." Something like hope flickered in Jake's eyes. "Laura, please, you have to help us. We have nowhere else to go." "Nowhere else to go," I echoed, arching an incredulous eyebrow. "And whose fault is that, exactly?" The question hung heavy in the air, laden with all the hurt and betrayal of the past several months. Sarah's gaze slid away, fresh shame coloring her cheeks. "We made mistakes," Jake admitted, his voice little more than a hoarse rasp. "Horrible, unforgivable mistakes. But you—" He raised his head, and I was struck by how utterly broken he looked in that moment. "You were my wife, Laura, the love of my life. Doesn't that mean anything to you anymore?" His words wormed their way past my defenses, stirring up embers of the affection I'd once felt for this man. The man he'd been before greed and hubris corrupted him utterly. Despite everything, some small, stubborn part of me still longed for the life we'd once dreamed of sharing. But those embers were banked by a harsh, immutable truth. That life was gone, ashes scattered by the winds of betrayal and deceit. Jake and Sarah had burned that bridge themselves, and I was too old and too weary to rebuild it from the ground up. "It means everything," I said at last, my voice thick. "That's why this hurts so much, Jake. That's why your actions cut me so deeply." I shook my head, blinking back the sting of tears. "But we can't go back. What's done is done. All I can do now is move forward, surrounding myself with the people who truly care about me." My gaze slid to Megan, hovering protectively in the hallway, and the love shining in her eyes gave me strength. Turning back to Jake and Sarah, I straightened my shoulders. "I'm sorry you two find yourselves in this position. But you brought it on yourselves, and those are consequences you're going to have to live with." For a beat, they simply stared at me, twin expressions of devastated disbelief etched across their features. Then, with a broken sound halfway between a sob and a snarl, Sarah whirled and stalked away, leaving Jake to follow in her wake. I watched them go, that bone-deep wariness settling over me once more. A chapter of my life had ended, painful though the parting had been. But as the door swung shut behind them, I felt a strange sense of lightness, of freedom. Crossing the room, I sank onto the couch beside Megan and rested my head on her shoulder, letting the tears come at last. They weren't tears of anguish or bitterness, though. They were tears of release, of rebirth. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new beginnings, but for now I simply allowed myself to feel the profound relief of having shed a burden I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. Jake and Sarah were out of my life for good, and strangely, for the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt truly at peace. The sun peeked through the curtains, bathing the living room in a warm, golden glow. I took a sip of my coffee, savoring the rich aroma and the peaceful quiet of the morning. So much had changed in the past few months, and yet, sitting here, surrounded by Megan and Eric's familiar furnishings, I felt more at home than I had in years. The weight of Jake and Sarah's betrayal no longer pressed down on me, replaced by a sense of liberation I hadn't dared dream possible. "Morning, Mom." Megan shuffled in, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. "You're up early." I smiled, patting the spot beside me on the couch. "Couldn't sleep. Too much on my mind, I guess." She settled next to me, draping a blanket over our laps. "Everything okay? You're not having second thoughts about—" No, I assured her quickly. "Nothing like that. I'm just thinking about the future for once, about what comes next." Megan's face broke into a grin. "Well, in that case, I've got some good news that might help with those thoughts." My brow furrowed curiously as she grabbed her laptop from the coffee table, tapping away for a few moments before turning the screen to face me. There, in stark digital text, was a real estate listing for a charming little house not far from here, complete with a beautiful sunroom that would be perfect for— "You're not seriously thinking of opening another kimono studio, are you?" I couldn't keep the delight from my voice. Megan shrugged, feigning nonchalance. "Well, we can't have you just sitting around collecting dust now, can we? Besides, Everyone could use a few more opportunities for zen in their lives these days. Tears pricked my eyes as I studied the listing, picturing the space already. The soft lighting, the serene decor, the quiet dignity of my life's passion finally being restored. After everything I'd endured, the idea of reclaiming that part of myself was almost overwhelming. Megan, words failed me for a moment. Thank you for everything. I couldn't have made it through this nightmare without you by my side. She bumped my shoulder affectionately. What are daughters for? Although I have to admit, watching you take down Dad and the Wicked Witch of Westchester was pretty satisfying in itself. We shared a conspiratorial grin, reveling in the memories of our hard-won victories. Jake and Sarah's appalled, ashen faces as the world turned against them would forever be seared into my mind. A small part of me wondered if I should feel guilty for taking such pleasure in their downfall. But the larger part, the part that had spent decades putting their needs and wants above my own, couldn't muster an ounce of remorse. They'd made their choices, and I'd simply ensured they faced the consequences. So, Megan began, bringing me back to the present, what do you think? You ready to dive back into the wonderful world of kimono dressing? I studied the listing once more, drinking in every lovingly captured detail, and felt a surge of excitement I hadn't experienced in far too long. This was my chance to start over, to rebuild the life I'd sacrificed so much for, but on my own terms this time. Meeting Megan's warm, hopeful gaze, I felt a brilliant smile blooming across my face. You know what? I declared, something like my old fire rekindling in my chest. I really think I am. There would be no more compromises, no more settling. The future was a blank canvas, and I was finally free to paint it in whatever bold, vibrant strokes I chose. As I pulled Megan into a fierce hug, I silently thanked whatever cosmic forces had given me the strength to endure the darkness and emerge into the light, ready to seize this new beginning with both hands. The past was over, a closed chapter tinged with hard-won lessons and bittersweet memories. But the future? Well, that was mine for the taking, and this time nothing was going to stand in my way. I never knew silence could be so loud until I watched my brother's facade crumble, revealing a stranger beneath. The words seemed to echo in the stillness of the room, hanging like a dense fog after Marla's venomous attack on our mother, Elaine. Her lips curled into a smirk as she taunted, "You're just too meek and insignificant to stand up for yourself." I glanced at Everett, my brother, expecting him to defend our gentle mother, but he remained impassive. A hollow shell of the man I once knew. It was as if Marla's venom had seeped into his veins, numbing him to her cruelty. Rage boiled within me, and I found myself stepping forward, fists clenched. "How dare you speak to her that way?" I spat, my voice trembling with fury. Marla's eyes narrowed, and she sneered. "Stay out of this, Cadence. It doesn't concern you." "Like hell it doesn't," I roared, closing the distance between us. "That's my mother you're berating, and I won't stand for it." Everett finally stirred, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Cadence, please, let it go." I shrugged him off, incredulous. "Let it go? Are you hearing yourself? She's treating Mom like garbage, and you're just letting it happen." Marla's laughter cut through the tension like a knife. "Poor, pathetic Elaine. She's lucky I even bother with her." She turned to Everett, her voice dripping with saccharine venom. "You see how she is, darling? Always needing to be coddled and fawned over." Everett's gaze dropped, and he nodded meekly, like a puppy being scolded. My heart broke for the brother I once knew, the confident, caring man who would have never tolerated such abuse. "Enough!" I roared, stepping between them. "I don't know what kind of twisted game you're playing, Marla, but it ends now. You will treat my mother with respect, or you can pack your bags and leave." Marla's eyes with fury, and for a moment I thought she might strike me. But then, as quickly as the storm had gathered, it dissipated, and she offered a sickly sweet smile. "Of course, Cadence, you're absolutely right. I'll be sure to watch my tongue around dear Elaine from now on." She swept past me, brushing my shoulder with hers as she exited the room. Everett followed her like a lost puppy, leaving me alone with my stunned mother. I gathered her into my arms, feeling her frail body tremble with silent sobs. "It's okay, Mom," I murmured, stroking her graying hair. "I won't let her hurt you anymore." As I held her close, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Marla's true nature had been revealed, and I knew in my heart that I had to protect my family, no matter the cost. The next few days were like walking on eggshells, each interaction fraught with tension. Marla's saccharine smiles were laced with venom, and Everett remained a hollow shell, refusing to acknowledge the rift that had formed. It wasn't until I stopped by Mom's house unannounced that the full extent of Marla's villainy became apparent. "Mom?" I called out as I stepped inside, taken aback by the unusual disarray. Dishes were piled high in the sink, and the floors were in desperate need of a vacuum. "In here, dear," came her weary voice from the living room. I found her slumped in her favorite armchair, a blanket draped over her lap as she knitted what appeared to be a scarf. Dark circles hung beneath her eyes, and her movements were slow and labored. "Mom, are you all right?" I asked, crossing the room to her side. She offered a faint smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Of course, darling. Just a bit tired, that's all." I frowned, taking in her disheveled appearance and the state of the house. "Have you been cooking and cleaning for Everett and Marla again?" Her gaze dropped, and she nodded almost imperceptibly. White-hot anger flared within me. "That's it. I'm putting a stop to this right now." Before she could protest, I was out the door and marching down the street towards Everett's place. I pounded on the door, barely containing my fury. Everett answered, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Cadence? What's going on?" "What's going on?" I echoed, jabbing a finger into his chest. "Your wife is running my mother ragged. That's what's going on." His eyes widened, and he glanced over his shoulder as if afraid Marla might overhear. "Keep your voice down," he hissed, stepping outside and pulling the door shut behind him. "I won't keep my voice down," I shouted, uncaring of who might hear. "Mom is exhausted, Everett. She's cooking, cleaning, and running herself into the ground just to keep Marla happy." He ran a hand over his face, his expression pained. I know, but Marla, she gets upset if things aren't just so." I stared at him, aghast. "Are you hearing yourself? You're letting her walk all over Mom because she throws a tantrum if she doesn't get her way?" Everett's shoulders slumped, and he dropped his gaze. "It's not that simple, Cadence. Marla, she has a way of making things difficult if I don't go along with what she wants." My hands balled into fists at my sides. "So what, you're just going to let her bully and manipulate all of us? Stand up for yourself, Everett. Stand up for our family." His jaw clenched, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a flicker of the brother I once knew. But then, just as quickly, it was gone, and he shook his head wearily. "I can't, Cadence. I'm sorry." With those words, he retreated back into the house, leaving me seething on the doorstep. As I stormed away, I knew that this was only the beginning. Marla's twisted grip on my family was tightening, and I had to find a way to break it before it was too late. Frustration gnawed at me in the days that followed. Everett's submission to Marla's twisted demands was like watching a man slowly drown, and I knew I had to act before it was too late. "We need to find out more about her," I told Theo one evening as we prepared dinner. My husband's brow furrowed, but he nodded, sensing the resolve in my voice. That night, after the dishes were done, we began our search. Scouring the internet for any trace of Marla's past, we slowly pieced together a disturbing pattern. "Look at this," Theo murmured, his eyes glued to the screen. "It seems Marla was briefly married to a wealthy businessman a few years back. But the marriage only lasted 6 months before he filed for divorce, citing emotional distress and manipulation." I leaned closer, my heart sinking as I read the details. And here's another. She was engaged to a prominent lawyer, but he broke it off after discovering she'd been lying about her background and finances. Page after page painted a chilling portrait of a woman who thrived on deceit and exploitation. Marla would charm and seduce wealthy men, leeching off their fortunes until they inevitably saw through her facade. Then she would move on to her next target, leaving a trail of broken hearts and empty bank accounts in her wake. "She's a black widow," I whispered, feeling ill, "and Everett is her latest victim." Theo squeezed my hand, his expression grim. "We have to show him, Cadence. We have to make him see the truth before it's too late." I nodded, my jaw set with determination. The next day, I invited Everett over under the guise of a casual family dinner. As we sat around the table, I could see the tension in his posture, the way his eyes kept flicking towards the door, as if he expected Marla to burst in at any moment. "Everett," I began, keeping my voice level. "We need to talk about Marla." He stiffened, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the edge of the table. "What about her?" I took a steadying breath and launched into the details we'd uncovered, the string of failed marriages and broken engagements, the pattern of exploitation and deceit. As I spoke, I watched the color drain from Everett's face. He shook his head vehemently, his eyes wide with denial. "No, you've got it all wrong. Marla would never." But the evidence was irrefutable, and with each new revelation, I could see the cracks in his facade deepening. Finally, when I had laid bare the full extent of Marla's machinations, Everett slumped in his chair, burying his face in his hands. "How could I have been so blind?" he whispered, his voice thick with anguish. I reached across the table, resting my hand on his arm. "It's not too late, Everett. We can stop her before she destroys our family." He lifted his head, and I saw a flicker of the old Everett, the fierce determination that had once burned so brightly. "You're right," he said, his jaw set. "It's time to end this." As we began to formulate our plan, I couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. The veil had been lifted, and now it was time to take back control from the woman who had wrought so much pain and misery. The confrontation with Marla was like a powder keg waiting to ignite. Everett and I had agreed to approach her together, our united front bolstered by the damning evidence we'd uncovered. I could sense Everett's trepidation as we stood on the doorstep of his home, but there was a newfound determination in his eyes that filled me with hope. Marla answered the door, her perfectly coiffed hair and immaculate makeup a stark contrast to the sneer that twisted her features. Well, if it isn't the dynamic duo," she drawled, her gaze flickering between us with thinly veiled disdain. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Cut the act, Marla," I spat, pushing past her into the house. "We know what you've been up to." Her brows shot up, but her expression remained infuriatingly smug. "And what, pray tell, have I been up to?" Everett stepped forward, squaring his shoulders. "We know about your past, Marla. The marriages, the engagements, all the men you've manipulated and exploited for their money." For a moment, her mask slipped, and I saw a flicker of panic in her eyes. But just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by a derisive laugh. "Oh, Everett, you can't possibly believe these ridiculous accusations, can you?" She sidled up to him, trailing a manicured hand down his arm. "Your sister is just jealous, darling. She's always resented our happiness." I opened my mouth to protest, but Everett held up a hand, his gaze boring into hers. "Don't bother, Marla," he said, his voice low and steady. "We have proof, documents, records, testimonies from your past victims. It's over." Her eyes narrowed to slits, and for the first time I saw the true depths of her malice laid bare. "You ungrateful wretch," she hissed, her words dripping with venom. "After everything I've done for you, this is how you repay me?" Everett remained unmoved, his jaw set in a firm line. "You've done nothing but lie and manipulate, Marla. It ends now." With a snarl of rage, she turned on me, her perfectly manicured nails digging into my arm as she grabbed me. "This is all you're doing, you meddling bitch," she spat, her face contorted in fury. "You're just jealous that your pathetic life will never measure up to mine." Before I could react, Everett had wedged himself between us, his hands gripping Marla's wrists as he pried her away. "That's enough," he growled, his eyes blazing with a fire I hadn't seen in years. "You're done manipulating this family, Marla. It's over." She struggled against his grip, her eyes wild with desperation. "You'll regret this, Everett," she shrieked. "I'll make sure you lose everything, your job, your money, your precious family." But her threats rang hollow, her carefully constructed facade lying in shattered pieces at our feet. As Everett hauled her towards the door, she turned her vitriol on me once more. "You think you've won?" she snarled. "This is far from over, Cadence. Mark my words, you'll pay for this." And with that, she was gone, her angry screams echoing down the street as Everett slammed the door behind her. We stood in silence for a long moment, the weight of what had transpired hanging heavy in the air. Finally, Everett turned to me, his expression a mixture of shame and gratitude. "Thank you," he murmured, pulling me into a fierce embrace. "You saved me from a lifetime of misery." As I held him, I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph amidst the turmoil. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Marla's threats still lingered, a reminder that her vindictive nature knew no bounds. But in that moment, with my brother by my side once more, I knew we could weather any storm she threw our way. The family she had tried so desperately to fracture was now stronger than ever, and we would face her wrath together, united and unbreakable. In the days following Marla's explosive departure, a fragile peace settled over our family. Everett seemed lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders, but I knew better than to let my guard down. Marla's parting threat still echoed in my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was biding her time, plotting her next move. So when Theo came to me one evening, his expression grim, I steeled myself for the worst. "Cadence," he began, settling beside me on the couch. "I think we have a problem." My heart dropped, and I braced myself for whatever bombshell he was about to unleash. "I just got off the phone with your dad," he continued. "Apparently, Marla has been pressuring Everett to sell the family home." A chill ran down my spine as the implications sank in. The house wasn't just a building. It was a symbol of our family's legacy, a place where countless memories had been forged. "She's trying to isolate him," I murmured, my hands clenching into fists. "Strip away everything that ties him to us so she can worm her way back in." Theo nodded grimly. "Your dad said Everett has been reluctant, but Marla is relentless. She's playing on his guilt, telling him it's the only way to make a fresh start." White-hot anger surged through me, and I shot to my feet, pacing the length of the living room. "That conniving snake," I spat. "After everything she's done, she still has the audacity to try and tear our family apart." Theo caught my arm, pulling me to a halt. "Cadence, we have to do something. If she succeeds in getting Everett to sell the house, it'll be that much harder to break her hold over him." I took a deep breath, tamping down the fury that threatened to consume me. Theo was right. We needed a plan, a way to make Everett see the truth before it was too late. "Call Dad," I said, my voice steely with resolve. "Tell him we're staging an intervention tonight. It's time to put an end to Marla's games once and for all." A few hours later, we were gathered in the living room of the family home. Mom, Dad, Everett, Theo, and myself. The tension was thick, Everett's eyes darting toward the exits as if he expected Marla to burst through the door at any moment. "What's this all about?" he demanded, his gaze finally landing on me. I took a steadying breath, squaring my shoulders. "It's about Marla," I said, holding his gaze, "and her latest attempt to manipulate you into selling this house." His eyes widened and he opened his mouth to protest, but I forged ahead. "Don't try to deny it, Everett. We know she's been pressuring you, playing on your guilt and insecurities. But can't you see? This is just another ploy to isolate you from your family, to make you dependent on her again." Everett's jaw clenched, and he shook his head vehemently. "You're wrong, Cadence. Marla just wants what's best for us, a fresh start away from all the drama and conflict." I scoffed, feeling the frustration mount. "Wake up, Everett. She's the one causing all the drama and conflict. She's a toxic parasite, and she'll never stop until she's drained every last ounce of life from this family." The words hung heavy in the air, and for a long moment, no one spoke. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw Mom rise from her chair, her face etched with a determination I'd never seen before. "Your sister is right, Everett," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "That woman's caused nothing but pain and misery since the day she wormed her way into our lives." She crossed the room, laying a hand on his arm. "This house is our home, our legacy. Please don't let her take that away from us." Everett's gaze flickered between us, his expression a whirlwind of emotions. I could see the battle raging within him, the struggle between Marla's poisonous influence and the love for his family. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "You're right," he whispered, his voice thick with shame. "I've been so blind, so desperate to make things work with Marla that I've nearly lost everything that truly matters." He looked up, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I won't let her win, not this time. The house stays, and Marla—" He swallowed hard. "Marla is out of our lives for good." A collective sigh of relief swept through the room, and I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The battle had been hard fought, but in the end, love and loyalty had prevailed over Marla's twisted machinations. As we gathered around Everett, enveloping him in an embrace, I knew that our family was finally on the path to healing. The shadows that had lingered for so long were fading, and a new dawn was on the horizon. One where Marla's poisonous influence could no longer reach us. The day of Mom's birthday celebration dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the storm that was brewing beneath the surface. As I helped her prepare for the party, arranging platters of her famous lemon bars and hanging streamers, I couldn't shake the sense of anticipation that buzzed through my veins. This was it. The culmination of weeks of planning, the moment when we would finally expose Marla's true nature to the world and break her hold over Everett once and for all. "You seem tense, dear," Mom murmured, laying a gentle hand on my arm. "Is everything all right?" I forced a smile, giving her hand a reassuring squeeze. "Everything's fine, Mom. Just want to make sure your party is perfect." She returned my smile, her eyes shining with affection. "As long as my family is here, it will be." As the guests began to arrive, the house filled with the sounds of laughter and conversation, a temporary reprieve from the turmoil that had plagued us for far too long. Everett arrived with a hesitant smile, his gaze constantly flicking towards the door as if expecting Marla to make an appearance. "It's going to be all right," I murmured, pulling him aside. "We're going to put an end to her lies once and for all." He nodded, his jaw set with determination, and rejoined the party. As the afternoon wore on, I could feel the tension mounting, the calm before the storm. Finally, when the last of the guests had arrived, I caught Theo's eye and gave him a subtle nod. It was time. Clearing my throat, I clinked my glass, calling for silence. "If I could have everyone's attention, please." The room gradually fell quiet, all eyes turning towards me with a mixture of curiosity and confusion. "First and foremost," I began, "I want to thank you all for coming to celebrate my incredible mother on her birthday." A smattering of applause rippled through the crowd, and Mom ducked her head shyly, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "However," I continued, my voice growing steely, "there is another reason we've gathered you all here today." I locked eyes with Everett, giving him a subtle nod of encouragement before turning my attention back to the assembled guests. For far too long, a dark shadow has loomed over this family, a poisonous presence that has sought to divide and manipulate us for her own selfish gain. My gaze swept over the crowd, daring anyone to look away. I'm speaking, of course, about Marla. A hush fell over the room, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Everett tense, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the back of a chair. "Marla has woven a tangled web of lies and deceit," I pressed on, my voice ringing with conviction. "She has exploited and preyed upon my brother, leeching off his fortune and manipulating him into cutting ties with those who truly care about him." Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the crowd, but I forged ahead, laying bare the evidence we had gathered, the trail of broken engagements and failed marriages, the testimonies from her past victims. As I spoke, I could see the shock and revulsion etched on the faces of our guests, the realization sinking in that they had been duped by Marla's carefully constructed facade. Finally, when every last sordid detail had been exposed, I turned my gaze to Everett, who stood frozen, his eyes wide with a mixture of shame and relief. "It's over, Everett," I said softly. "You're free of her poison." For a long moment he remained motionless, his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Then, slowly, he straightened his shoulders, his features hardening with a newfound resolve. "You're right, Cadence," he said, his voice ringing out across the hushed room. "It's over." Turning on his heel, he strode towards the front door, throwing it open with a resounding bang, and there, frozen on the doorstep with a look of abject horror painted across her features, stood Marla. "You," she sputtered, her perfectly manicured mask cracking as she took in the scene before her. "You can't do this to me." But her protests fell on deaf ears as Everett advanced, his eyes blazing with a fire I hadn't seen in years. "Get out," he growled, his words laced with a finality that brooked no argument. "You're not welcome here. Not anymore." For a beat, Marla seemed poised to argue, her mouth opening and closing like a gasping fish. But as her gaze swept over the sea of accusatory stares, she must have realized the futility of her situation. With a cry of outrage, she whirled on her heel and stormed off into the night, her heels clicking angrily on the pavement as she disappeared from sight. A deafening silence hung in her wake, punctuated only by the occasional murmur or cough. Then, slowly, the tension began to dissipate, replaced by a collective sigh of relief. As I looked around at the faces of my family and friends, I saw nothing but pride and support reflected back at me. We had faced down the darkness that had threatened to consume us, and emerged victorious, battered perhaps, but unbroken. And as Everett turned to me, his eyes shining with unshed tears, I knew that our journey towards healing had truly begun. In the days that followed Marla's explosive banishment from our lives, a palpable shift seemed to ripple through our family. It was as if a great weight had been lifted, a toxic cloud of negativity and manipulation that had hung over us for far too long. Everett, in particular, seemed to undergo a profound transformation. Gone was the haunted, hollow-eyed man who had been so thoroughly cowed by Marla's venom. In his place stood a man reborn, his shoulders squared and his gaze clear and focused. "It's like waking from a nightmare," he confided in me one evening as we sat on the porch, sipping lemonade and basking in the warm evening air. All this time, I was living in a fog, blind to the truth and trapped by her lies. I reached over, giving his hand a reassuring squeeze. "You're free of her now, Everett. We all are." He nodded, his expression solemn. "I just wish I had seen it sooner, before she had the chance to inflict so much pain and damage." A familiar pang of guilt twisted in my gut, but I pushed it aside. Dwelling on regrets would only hold us back from truly healing. "The important thing is that we made it through," I said firmly, "and now we can focus on rebuilding and moving forward as a family." Everett smiled, the weight of Marla's lingering specter seeming to lift from his shoulders. "You're right. It's a new beginning for all of us." As the days stretched into weeks, the true extent of Marla's deception began to unravel. It seemed that her pattern of exploitation and manipulation had cast a wide net, ensnaring countless victims over the years. One by one, they emerged from the shadows, emboldened by the news of her downfall and eager to share their stories. Tales of emotional abuse, financial ruin, and shattered lives poured forth, painting a chilling portrait of a woman utterly devoid of conscience or remorse. The fallout was swift and merciless. Marla's carefully constructed house of cards came crashing down around her, leaving her social standing in tatters, and her once abundant finances drained to the dregs. Through it all, Everett remained a pillar of strength, weathering the storm with a newfound resilience that inspired us all. Gone was the guilt and shame that had once weighed him down. In its place was a steely determination to make amends and move forward. "I can't change the past," he said during one of our many heart-to-heart conversations, "but I can damn well make sure the future is better for all of us." And true to his word, he did. With an unwavering focus, he set about rebuilding the relationships that Marla had so callously fractured, starting with our parents. It was a long and often painful process, fraught with difficult conversations and emotional revelations. But through it all, our family remained united, a bond forged in the fires of adversity and tempered by our shared determination to triumph over Marla's poisonous legacy. As for my role, I took it upon myself to be the mediator, the calm voice of reason that helped guide our family through the turbulent waters of healing. It wasn't always easy, and there were times when tempers flared and progress seemed elusive. But I persevered, drawing strength from the knowledge that we were finally on the right path, a path that led away from the shadows and towards the light of a brighter future. And as the weeks turned into months, that future began to take shape before our very eyes. The rifts that had once seemed insurmountable slowly knitted themselves together, replaced by a newfound appreciation for the unbreakable bonds that tied us as a family. It was during one of our Sunday dinners, the table laden with Mom's famous pot roast, and the air filled with laughter and conversation, that I truly realized how far we had come. Gazing around at the smiling faces of my loved ones, I felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over me. We had weathered the storm, emerging battered but unbroken, our love and loyalty to one another stronger than ever before. And in that moment, I knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. A united front, fortified by the knowledge that the darkness that had once threatened to consume us had finally been banished for good. In the aftermath of Marla's explosive departure, a fragile peace settled over our family. It was as if we had all been holding our collective breath, bracing for the next inevitable blow from her twisted machinations. But as the days stretched into weeks and her poisonous presence faded into a distant memory, we slowly began to exhale. Of course, the road to healing was far from smooth. Marla's betrayal had left deep scars, both emotional and financial. Everett, in particular, struggled with the fallout of her deceit, his once thriving business and personal accounts drained to the dregs by her relentless exploitation. "I feel like such a fool," he confided in me one evening, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "How could I have been so blind, so willing to hand over everything I've worked for to that parasite?" I wrapped an arm around his shoulders, offering what comfort I could. "You were manipulated, Everett. She preyed on your trust and twisted your devotion into a weapon against you. But that's over now." He nodded, his jaw clenched with determination. "You're right. It's time to start rebuilding, to take back what she stole from me, from all of us." And rebuild we did, each of us shouldering a share of the burden. Mom and Dad opened their home to Everett, offering him a sanctuary as he sorted through the tangled mess of his finances. Theo, ever the level-headed voice of reason, helped devise a plan to get Everett's business back on track, utilizing his keen business acumen to plug the leaks and stem the tide of financial ruin. As for me, I became the glue that held our fractured family together. I organized weekly dinners, ensuring we all had a regular opportunity to come together and reconnect. I mediated the difficult conversations, lending an understanding ear and offering gentle guidance when tempers flared. It wasn't easy, and there were times when the strain of it all threatened to overwhelm me. But whenever I felt myself wavering, I would think back to those dark days when Marla's poisonous grip had nearly torn us apart, and I would find the strength to persevere. Slowly but surely the cracks began to mend, and our family emerged from the rubble stronger than ever before. Everett's business flourished under Theo's guidance, and he was able to regain his financial footing, a newfound humility and appreciation for the value of hard work shining through. Mom and Dad, too, seemed rejuvenated by the renewed sense of unity that bound us together. Gone were the hollow-eyed resignation and strained silences that had plagued them during Marla's reign of terror. In their place was a warmth and vibrancy that I hadn't seen in years, a reminder of the unbreakable bonds that had sustained our family through countless storms. And as for me, well, I found myself reinvigorated by the knowledge that my unwavering determination had played a pivotal role in our family's salvation. No longer was I content to be a mere bystander in life, watching from the sidelines as others shaped their destinies. I had tasted the power of taking action, of standing up for what was right, and I knew that I could never go back to the way things were before. It was this newfound sense of purpose that drove me to take on a new challenge: the restoration of our family home. The once proud manor had fallen into disrepair during Marla's toxic tenure, its rooms and halls battered by neglect and the weight of her corrosive presence. But now, with her shadow banished and our family united, I saw an opportunity to breathe new life into the heart of our legacy. Enlisting the help of Everett and Theo, we set about the task of restoring the grand old house to its former glory, stripping away the layers of grime and decay to reveal the beauty that had been hidden beneath. It was backbreaking work, filled with long hours and more than a few heated arguments. But through it all, we persevered, fueled by a shared sense of purpose and the knowledge that every nail hammered, every wall sanded, was a tangible symbol of our family's resilience and rebirth. And when the final coat of paint had dried and the last piece of furniture had been carefully arranged, we stood back and marveled at our handiwork. The house fairly glowed, its polished floors and gleaming woodwork a testament to the power of perseverance and love. It was on a warm summer evening, the air thick with the scent of freshly cut grass and blooming flowers, that we gathered on the front porch to celebrate our victory. Mom and Dad, hand in hand, their faces aglow with pride. Everett and Theo, shoulders brushing as they shared a conspiratorial grin. And me, standing in the midst of it all, my heart swelling with a sense of triumph and unbridled joy. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. I raised my glass in a silent toast. To family, to resilience, and to the unbreakable bonds that had carried us through the darkest of storms. For in that moment, bathed in the warmth of the fading light, and surrounded by the people I loved most in this world, I knew that we had truly emerged from the shadows. Battered, perhaps, but unbroken and more united than ever before. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with new challenges and obstacles to overcome. But as I looked around at the smiling faces of my loved ones, I felt a surge of confidence and determination. Whatever lay ahead, we would face it together. A family forged in the fires of adversity, tempered by the knowledge that our love and loyalty to one another was unshakable. Marla's poisonous legacy had been purged, and in its place a new chapter was beginning. One written in the bonds of unbreakable family, resilience, and hope for a brighter tomorrow.